Well, welcome. Today we're going to start to put some more meat on the bones on property inspections. I am going to build on where we stopped from in the prior session. Let me begin by making a few general statements. You have probably heard the saying that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, or you shouldn't judge a person by merely their appearance, or you shouldn't judge things on first sight, or that image is not everything. I will say that in general, whilst that advice is understandable on a generic basis in relation to relationships, people, and life, when it comes to investing, that is one piece of advice that you have 100% full permission to go against. You should always and you must always judge a building based on three things. One is your visual observation. The second is your intuitive feelings. And the third, and in my opinion, one of the most important, if not the most important, is your analytical findings. These are three ways or three things to keep in mind when you're carrying out a property inspection. So I'll try to build on this, but I believe you already have a relatively sound understanding of buildings, and that has come from living in a building, studying in buildings, working in a building, and so what I will try to do is to build on the existing understanding and knowledge you have about buildings, and even more importantly, try to build on the power of your observation and your experience, certainly living around structures. Now, a building generally is made up of several parts. So think about this sketch that I have done. A building is made up of several parts. The first part is what we call the external envelope. The external envelope is the part of the building that enclose the building, roof, structure, doors, windows, etc. We call that the external envelope. The second part is the internal spaces, and that's everything. If this was elevation and this was a floor plan, the internal spaces would be, internally bedroom, living room, toilet, kitchen, spare bedroom. These are the internal spaces. And the number three is what we call the installed services. So a building comprises of the external envelope, the internal spaces, and then the installed services within the building. The installed services in the United States will comprise of things in the USA, or rather in North America. It's called HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and comfort cooling. And this would also include plumbing. In the UK, we generally call them building services. This is a UK terminology. This is a US terminology. Building services, and that includes all of the services that serve or supply any form of infrastructure to the building, or sometimes in the UK, depending on the type of building, it's called MEP, mechanical, electrical, public health. And that comprises the installed services. Now, for ease of reference, as we go along in today's session, I am going to, when I say building, I am going to include in the building things such as the land, the structure that sits on the land, including any form of boundary walls and fences and gates, for ease of reference, just so that I don't have to keep repeating numerous words. Now, the purpose of your inspection is to ascertain, this is a very, very important statement I'm making, so just if you can, try to zero in on this statement. When you inspect a property, the purpose of your inspection, if you're looking to buy a property, the purpose of your inspection is to ascertain the condition of the various parts of the building, to ascertain the condition of the various parts of the building, and then to determine the current value. So you're looking at condition, value. The current value, call this A, B. C is you're trying to ascertain the life expectancy. D, you're trying to ascertain the amount of repairs needed. And then E, finally, you're trying to estimate the estimated cost of all repairs that are needed to the building. So these are five specific focus areas. You're trying to understand the condition of the building, its current value, its life expectancy, the repairs needed, and the estimated cost of all those repairs. So keep that in mind. Now, if you are a first-time buyer, or if you are purchasing a property with the aid of a mortgage, then your lender will usually arrange for an inspection to be carried out on the property by a competent person. I'll try to explain this in some detail as we go along. I'll try to explain the reason for that. Now, usually the competent person would be a building surveyor or an engineer. Now, if your lender does not commission someone to inspect the property, it's up to you to insist that one should take place. There is a mistake that is often made by first-time buyers or inexperienced investors. People are trying to save a few pennies, and they will normally go for what we call a desktop valuation, or they might go for a home survey. All of these are several types of inspections or valuations of the property. Some others might go for what we call a building survey, or some might go for what we call a structural inspection. Each of these have different levels of technical scrutiny. As you would imagine, in descending order, the quantity and quality of information increases. So the least thorough inspection is the desktop valuation. This is where someone sits down on a computer and decides, having looked at the photographs of the property, they decide what they believe the property is worth. And they're doing this on behalf of the bank. A home survey is when they actually come down, but it's very, very surface. It's not detailed. A building survey is a more in-depth inspection. A structural inspection is more of a thorough inspection. So I'll go back to what I said. If you're purchasing a property with the aid of a mortgage. Usually, the bank should, or the lending company should, suggest that you carry out a minimum of a home survey. I would always recommend to you to do something more. But let me just stop there and move on, and I'll come back to this shortly. Now, if you are purchasing a property without the aid of a mortgage, so you have two buying options. You have those that buy with the mortgage and those that buy without a mortgage. If you're buying without a mortgage, the responsibility for securing a competent person to carry out the works on your behalf will be yours. The bank will not suggest or recommend, because the bank is not involved in the purchase. Now, irrespective of your funding arrangement, whether you are buying with a mortgage or you're buying without a mortgage, irrespective of which, I would always encourage you to obtain a full building survey. A full building survey. I would invite you to do this rather than a home buyer's survey, or rather than a valuation survey. Between a desktop valuation and a home buyer survey is what we call a valuation survey. A valuation survey is even it's less technically detailed in comparison to the home buyer survey. So I would encourage you to always obtain a full building survey rather than home buyers or valuation survey. And the reason is because a full building survey is more detailed and it provides you with better value. If you are buying a period building or a large building, or you're buying a building as a whole, or you're buying a building in parts, if that part of the building you're acquiring is part of a much larger building, I would always instruct you, and I would always recommend a structural inspection. Now let me say that again. As a minimum, you should be carrying out a full building survey. But if you are buying a building and the building you're buying is a period building, it's an old building, or if the building is a large building, or if you're buying a unit in a large structure, then I would always recommend a structural inspection in addition to the full building survey. So what I am saying here is I would recommend number 3 and number 4 for period buildings or for large buildings. Period buildings usually refer to buildings of a certain time period in the United Kingdom. We have different types. These primarily were pre-war buildings before the First World War, and therefore most of these buildings are more than 100 years old. So from a structural perspective, taking into account the age of construction and the amount of use, such buildings may have deteriorated or dilapidated, hence the importance of a structural inspection. Now, I should also say this, a structural inspection is a more detailed, in-depth inspection of the integrity of the structure and the grounds. Not just the building itself, the structural engineer will look at the grounds. Usually this will be done by someone who is a structural engineer or someone who is a civil engineer. Structural engineering is simply a branch of civil engineering. It's a specialization of civil engineering, but you begin generally learning the same things. So a civil engineer can carry out the same works. A structural engineer can carry out the same works. Usually civil engineering is best for anything to do with the ground or below ground. Structural engineers tend to focus more on the structure itself. But what you tend to find is there is a cross-fertilization between both roles. Some people start out as civil engineering and they move into structural engineering, and vice versa. But I would simply say, if you're buying a complicated building, basements, lower ground, unique soil condition, you need a civil engineer. If it's a simple building, no basement, no cellar, no lower ground area, straightforward, then a structural engineer should be able to deal with the inspection on your behalf. You should also be aware that it is up to you as a buyer to satisfy yourself as to the state and the condition of the property. And even if you're buying with a mortgage, it's up to you to be aware and satisfy yourself as to the state and the condition of the property. And the reason is because you will have no legal claim against the seller or even the lender. Should you find out in the future that there are defects with the property, once you've completed the purchase, if you discover for some reason that there is a significant structural defect, the seller, once you've signed the contract, which means you've completed the sale and you've exchanged, the seller will bear no liability. In addition, even if you've used the mortgage, remember, let's say you're buying a property and it's for £500,000, a 2-bedroom flat. You've put down £50,000 as your deposit. The bank has given you £450,000 as a loan. If there is a defect, and if that defect is severe, according to the terms of the mortgage, you will still have to meet the mortgage obligation. The bank bears no responsibility for that failure to recognize and understand the significance of the responsibility that should have been yours. Now, whether you're buying a property with cash or whether you're buying with the aid of a mortgage, the building inspection by a professional usually takes place after the offer has been made to the seller and after the offer has been accepted by the seller. I'm going to go through a few things that I think will be useful, what I call a chronology of events. The inspection takes place typically after you've made an offer and after the offer has been accepted. Now, my aim in this session and in this series is to provide you with enough information so that by the time you are making an offer, you would have considered every single thing that potentially, and in my opinion, will be highlighted by the professional in their inspection report. Now, here's what I'm saying. Let me draw a timeline. It's called a timeline because it's a time on a line. You find, let's say this is you see a property, you make an offer, the seller accepts the offer. If you're buying with a mortgage, usually the inspection works are commissioned here. So there is a time delay. And all I'm saying is, what I'm hoping to do is bring back that knowledge that the surveyor or the structural engineer will be giving you in his report. I'd like to bring some of that back to this point so that before you even make the offer, you've considered some of the things that will be discovered in the future. Now, by having this knowledge, I think, if you have this knowledge, especially in advance of your viewing, particularly, you would be in a much better position to prevent any buyer's remorse, to prevent you from incurring any unnecessary, non-refundable costs. And the reason for this is because if you find a property and the offer is made and the offer is accepted, usually as part of the bank processing the mortgage application, you would have to pay a mortgage application fee. At that time, you would have appointed a solicitor, and the bank might commission a surveyor to carry out the inspection. Now, all of this knowledge I'm sharing is to ensure that you're not wasting money, time, on a property that is not suitable to your needs, especially if the property has issues. Now, depending on the circumstances, it takes about 3 to 5 weeks to receive a professional report, evaluation, a home buyer's or building survey report. Now, this timeline certainly can be short. It can be shorter than 3 to 5 weeks. If you're buying in cash and you're instructing the works yourself, then it's possible to have this done almost immediately. But when you're buying through a lender, because the process has to go through their system, you do have some delays. It's what you find in most bureaucratic organizations or institutions. There will be delays, and that's the reason why it takes 3 to 5 weeks. Typically, it takes about a week and a half for the surveyor to produce their report. But it takes maybe a week for the bank to commission the surveyor, and then it takes a few days for the surveyor to come down to site, and then they produce their report, and hence the delay. 3 weeks, in my opinion, assuming it's 3 weeks, is a long time to wait to find out that there are major issues with the property. On the other hand, if what I'm sharing in this series is beneficial, then what that would mean is that on the first viewing, if carried out properly, following these instructions and these teachings, you would know immediately if the property they are looking to buy is the right one, and you would know if you are making a prudent purchase, and even whether you should be proceeding with an offer. Now, for most lenders, like I said before, the home buyer's survey is mandatory. It's mandatory for most lenders because it's a precautionary due diligence process, because the bank is going to be using a significant part of their capital for the purchase. So most good banks and most good lending organizations or building societies or creditors will instruct a survey. But I have also seen some banks that are happy to proceed without a survey, and they can proceed even without making it mandatory. They will usually be happy to go with a simple desktop valuation assessment. One of the reasons that is possible is because the bank, keep this in mind, when the bank makes a loan to you, the bank also insures. They buy insurance on this. So even if the property turns out to be defective and there are issues and you can't make your credit commitments, the bank is still insured. But the good banks will make sure that they instruct you to proceed with a survey before they process their loan advance. Let me perhaps, I guess, a right way to bring today's session to a useful close will be to go through what I call the chronology of events when you're purchasing a property, and when you're purchasing a property with a mortgage. These are what I call the chronology of events. Now, the first, and these are my from my experience. The first is that you find a property. So step 1, you find property. Step 2, you view the property. Step 3, you make an offer. Step 4, offer accepted. Or it can be rejected, but let's just proceed on the basis that the offer is accepted. Step 5, your mortgage, because you're using a mortgage, is agreed in principle by the lender. So mortgage, you receive a mortgage in principle. This is where the mortgage company says, yeah, we're happy to loan you 450,000 for the purchase in principle, subject to all of the conditions that come with the mortgage, such as affordability, the property being worthy of the loan, etc., etc. Step 6, the lender instructs a survey. Step 7, the survey is carried out by the surveyor. Step 8, the survey report is issued. Step 9, the lender approves and accepts your mortgage if the report findings are favorable. Step 10, the legal contracts are exchanged. So we call this exchange. Step 11, the home is yours. Now, these are some of the steps that you will go through if you're buying with a mortgage. Now, for purchases that are made without the aid of a mortgage, it's vital that you still, like I said, seek professional guidance and make sure you have a professional on your team to inspect the property on your behalf before the sale is completed. Now, even if you have some technical expertise in the building industry, I tend to find that if you have someone who is independent and unbiased and has no emotional attachment to the property, they could provide, or they could serve as a useful way of playing a devil's advocate role, just to make sure that you're not overlooking certain things simply because you're emotionally attached or attracted to the property. Now, this advice is, in my opinion, especially for those who are paying with cash, this advice tends to be ignored by people who buy in cash. I've seen this a number of times. People who have wealth, they move forward with their investment purchase independently and without any professional advice. Seldom have I come across any of those cases where the person did not acknowledge at some point in the future that it was the wrong decision to have made. If you have no building experience and you proceed to purchase a property, especially a period building or a converted building or a building with a basement or lower ground floor, if you proceed with the purchase without any professional advice, I think you're taking on a risk that is unnecessary. Sometimes some people, you might find, refuse to pay for the full building survey because they're looking to save an extra £150, which is such a small amount of money when you take into account that if something is missed, you could be left with, a cost that is in the region of about £15,000. So just think about, you save £150 because you choose not to pay for a full building survey, and you go for just a simple home buyer survey or a desktop survey, and then sometime in the future you realize that you've incurred a cost of £15,000. What this means is that, unfortunately, because of the mistake you made, you've incurred a cost that is 100x or 10,000% higher than the price you should have paid. So let me stop there for today, and in the next session I'll go into more detail on some other items.